We're here at the home of club member Gary Kramer. As part of an extensive remodeling project, Gary is installing floor-to-ceiling paneling. He is going to be working with oak plywood, which is dimensionally stable and cost-effective. Hi, Gary.
Hi, Barry.
Now, I understand this used to be a two-car garage. Is that correct?
Yes, it was.
And you converted it into a family room?
Yes.
Now, that's going to take advantage of this beautiful lakeside view.
I think so.
Gary, how did you decide how the panels were going to be laid out in the room?
Originally, we took the concept from a magazine that we saw, and then we just took and laid it out for our room.
All right. Well, let's get those layout lines started.
Okay.
Gary chose 4x8 sheets of 1/4-inch oak plywood to cover the bulk of the wall area. The 1x4s and 1x6s were cut from 3/4-inch sheets of oak plywood. The solid oak panel molding was found at a local millwork supplier. Use a chalk line as a plumb bob and transfer the center point of the beam to the floor. Using the beam center line guarantees that the panels will be perfectly spaced on the most visual feature, the beam. Mark the center line on the floor and place the 24-inch mark of your tape on it. Center the first sheet by marking the floor at the end of the tape and at 48 inches. Transfer these marks to the walls. Because of the length of this wall, a 2-inch spacing between each sheet allowed us to use the plywood full width. This spacing should be adjusted for your wall based on your room size. The space will be covered by the 1x4. Mark each panel location on the wall. Use a drywall blade or scraper to remove any joint compound or ceiling spray texture. It can get in the way and hold the sheets away from the wall. Gary installed 2x4s horizontally every 2 feet while the wall was being framed. This backing will provide horizontal nailing locations for the paneling. Mark and label these locations as well as the vertical stud locations on the wall. Don't cut anything until all the layout is complete. Locate the electrical boxes using your layout lines as your reference point. This drywall square has notches every 1/8 inch and simplifies marking out the boxes. Use a jigsaw for this cut. It's more accurate and offers better control. Use a high-quality paneling adhesive to glue the panel to the wall. Position each piece, fitting to your layout lines. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations for the amount of glue to use. Pull the sheet away from the wall to assure the glue has made contact with both surfaces. Use a 1 3/4-inch nail or staple to secure the plywood through the drywall into the backer and studs. Staple primarily at the perimeter, where the holes will be covered by trim pieces. Staple just enough to ensure a good glue bond elsewhere. Gary found this rolling scaffolding at a garage sale for $75. After using it on this job, it's on my tool wish list. On a vaulted ceiling, install the centerpiece first and work from there. If you make an error, the piece can be recut for a shorter location. The gap at the ceiling will be covered by a 1x4, giving a wide margin for error. Pneumatic tools really speed the work, but all the fastening could be done by hand. 1/4-inch crown staples will disappear into the wood grain if you install them on the vertical plane. Measure the length of your next piece. This vaulted ceiling has a 4 12 rise, giving us a 16-inch drop from one side of the sheet to the other. Cut the plywood from the back to avoid chipping the face. Continue to install the pieces using your layout lines as a reference. Well, that's it for this wall. The plywood sheets are now installed. Now, even if our joints aren't perfect, it's okay because they'll be covered with trim. Now, the way we save money on this job is not to use solid 1x4 red oak, but rather narrow pieces cut from plywood stock. Now, the raw edges are going to be finished by using solid wood there, and that'll give us an elegant finished look. Use a table saw or radial arm saw to assure that the plywood is cut uniformly. Gary chose a 3.5-inch width for the top and center pieces, and 5.5 for the floor to give the bottom of the wall a more anchored feeling. Cut the vertical corner pieces and fit them to the ceiling. Scribe each piece of the corner to assure a tight fit. Back bevel the cut slightly so that the face makes contact with the ceiling. Gary, that's nice and tight.
Yeah, it is.
Now, you've decided to run the vertical pieces in here first. That'll match the doors, right? And then you'll follow up with the horizontal, midway, base, and up against the ceiling.
Exactly.
Now, this ceiling, you've got wax paper up there. What's that for?
Well, the ceiling was finished, and we didn't want to stain that, so we put the paper up. Once the board is put up, the trim board, we can just take a sharp knife, cut it away, and the ceiling will be saved.
That's going to save hours of time. It's a great idea. Now, one other thing we want to do, Gary, is we want to build this corner out first. That way, if there's any imperfection in this wall, we don't have to cope the return piece to make it perfect.
Great idea.
Okay? Assemble the corner with screws or biscuit joints. Be sure to pre-drill and countersink so the screw heads don't hold the assembled corner away from the wall. Use a pry bar to push the corner assembly tight to the ceiling. Nail from alternating sides every 12 to 16 inches, holding the piece tight as you go. Mark the location for the biscuit on both pieces. The cutter head will keep you from centering this biscuit. Cut into both the 1x4 for the ceiling and the installed corner. Dry fit the joint before you glue. The biscuit makes a stronger joint and assures that the faces will be flush. Use plenty of glue to ensure that the biscuit will swell properly. Wipe off the excess. Have a helper lift the 1x4 tight to the ceiling. Then nail it in using 2.5-inch nails. Because the plywood is only 8 feet long, there will be more joints than usual. Match the grain of these adjoining pieces for best results. It was easier to install the 1x4 before wrapping the beam. It gave us a sizable allowance to work with that will be covered up later. Snap a line for the center 1x4 36 inches from the floor. Set the 1x4s to it using biscuit joints on all the joints here as well. Create tight joints, pulling the center of the 1x4 away from the wall slightly. Nail the outer edge of the 1x4 and then release the center. It will push the trim even tighter toward the corner. Install the vertical 1x4 using one biscuit on each end. Set the bottom first and then push the top into the upper 1x4. Level the piece and then check it against the wall. When you're satisfied with the fit, nail it in. Snap a line at the bottom just as you did for the center piece. Install the 1x6 with nails at the upper and lower edge of the piece. With the bottom 1x6 firmly installed, measure the height for the lower vertical member. Cut this piece slightly long to assure tight joints. Cut biscuit slots in all meeting joints. Cut a second slot in the ends of the 1x4 to allow it to slip horizontally past the biscuits when the piece is installed. This permits flush assembly between the two installed members. Use a wood block to drive the piece horizontally into place. The faces should be flush and the joints tight. Light sanding will make the seam almost invisible. Verify that the vertical 1x4s are perfectly aligned. The panel molding is installed using mitered corners. Install the bottom piece first, making it tight to the 1x6. Nail directly into the wall, but also down into the 1x6 using 2-inch nails. Use either a sanding block or a block plane to make fine adjustments. Fit each joint in succession as you go. Glue the corners together to keep the joints from opening up over time. The block at the floor acts as a pry bar to hold the joint tight till the glue dries. Work your way around the panel. Use a piece of wood to protect the molding from damage. The inside edge is especially vulnerable. If you don't own a nail gun, it may be worth it to borrow or rent one of these. They really speed the installation. Fit the joint on the bottom last. It's nearer the floor and less visible. Use a nail set for any nail heads that aren't fully countersunk. They need to be recessed deep enough to accept a small amount of putty later on. Carefully sand the corners flush with 100 grit paper, sanding with the grain. Now cut the molding for the upper panel. The vaulted ceiling on this project created some challenging angles. We used scrap pieces to test each joint before cutting the finished piece. We determined that each inside angle cut should be 54 degrees. Since most saws can't cut angles over 45 degrees, here's how to make a cutting jig. Cut a piece of plywood scrap 45 degrees less than the angle you need, in this case 9 degrees. Clamp the jig to the fence. Then bring the saw blade to the 45-degree mark and make your cut. The 9 degrees are added to the 45, making a perfect 54-degree miter. You can use this technique for any angle over 45 degrees. Test fit the miter using another piece of scrap for the opposing side. When the fit is perfect, write the angle on the scrap and use it for a pattern. Make a second pattern for the angle on the left side, in this case 36 degrees. Use the same technique to verify this angle. Now measure and cut the top to length. Use your patterns to verify the fit before installing the piece. Fit the side to the top piece, making sure the angle joint is perfect before cutting the piece to length. Keep the side pieces plumb with the trim below. Discrepancies will be noticeable on this vertical plane. Follow the same procedure to fit and install the other side. When the bottom is aligned, nail it in. A wedge block is useful to force the joint tight. By installing the bottom piece of molding last, both joints are standard 45-degree cuts. Fit one end at a time, using a block plane to perfect the joints. Back bevel slightly so the faces are tight. Be patient. Getting great results on inside mitered corners takes time and practice. After dry fitting the piece, glue the joints and install permanently. Glue the ends, being alert for any glue squeeze out. If it dries on the surface, thoroughly sand it. Dry glue won't take stain. Tap the corners together and nail the piece. Keep nails at least 2 to 3 inches away from the ends to avoid splitting. Use this same technique for all the panels.
Now, Gary, you've got a lot of the paneling done here, but we're over here to this door location. How do you plan to finish the inside? You don't plan to use standard panel stock here, do you?
Nope, I picked up a special piece of this back banding molding.
Now, where did you get this?
Local molding store.
Okay, it's not custom.
Nope, it's where I picked up everything else.
Okay, and that'll finish up this inside edge nicely.
Exactly.
So when the paneling stock goes on, it'll look like that.
Yes. Now I've got a piece of this installed over on the window.
Oh,
you want to take a look?
Yeah, sure.
And here you can see it's been installed, Barry.
That's a great detail. That works out really well with the jamb over here, too.
The curved trim pieces offer a challenge for every handyman. Carefully scribe the profile of the arch onto a piece of oak plywood. A jigsaw is the most effective tool to make a curved cut. Use a square to mark in the width of the back band, creating the inner profile of the 1x4 trim piece. Then add 3.5 inches to make the outer edge and mark again. Cut out the 1x4 using these lines. Cut carefully, but keep in mind that both edges of the trim will be covered. The ceiling 1x4 and the arch 1x4 meet on the left side, which created this odd-shaped piece where the trim joined. Install the 1x4 at the ceiling as you did before. Next, cut and install the 1x4s on the sides, working up toward the arch piece. Don't nail the last piece until the biscuit joints are cut in. Glue these together as well to keep them together over time. The left trim piece is biscuited at both the top and right side. The vaulted ceiling trim met the arch trim and created this acute angle. I cut it with a coping saw and a block plane.
Well, now that piece is in. The next step is to cut the profile return for this. Now, because this is radius, there's no way we can bend 1.25 inch solid lumber to fit that profile. So Gary has taken a piece of molding and he's ripped it on the table saw into thirds and will put in one piece at a time to match that profile.
Since the outer piece is more visible, install it first. Use a block plane to fit the tapered joint. Glue the entire length of the piece to connect it firmly to the arch. Glue alone will hold the tapered joint together. There is no way to nail a piece this size. Repeat the process for the remaining pieces, fitting the acute angle before cutting the piece to length. Use pin nails or 1-inch brads to secure them. Installing the vertical piece on the end was a snap by comparison. Use the same techniques we showed you earlier to cut these joints. Gary cut the back out of the molding to allow it to bend enough to conform to the arch profile. When we cut the back out of the trim, it no longer rested against the 1x4, ruining the reveal. We had to install a backer the same size as the material we cut out to get our reveals to match the rest of the back band. Use glue and nails to hold the backer securely. The back band trim will be nailed to it. Next, fit the trim using a brace to hold the center in place. Then install. Fasten the piece securely with 2-inch nails. Work from one end up to the center of the arch and then down the other side. And don't remove the brace until the glue is dry. Finish the job by installing the remaining pieces of back band, working from the arch down to the floor. Work carefully to ensure a consistent reveal. Glue each miter joint to keep them from moving and wipe off any excess glue with the rag. Place your nails about 12 inches apart. This piece will get bumped from time to time.
A little bit of sanding cleans up these joints and makes those look great, but isn't this a great project? Now, by cutting that molding into 3 pieces, it perfectly conforms to the arch. If you work carefully and slowly, you'll get a great looking result. And this is a room that this family can enjoy for years to come.
You can achieve these kinds of results too by following the same steps the Kramers did. They started by hand sanding the molding and used an orbital sander and a light touch on the plywood. They stained everything and applied 2 coats of polyurethane. The nail holes were filled between coats, ensuring that the color putty wouldn't stain the unprotected wood.